The announcement came without fanfare. No sirens, no banners, no ominous tones echoing through the corridors, just a line of text blinking across the overhead display of Galactic Warfare Academy's main training hall. Final evaluation commencing. Corridor of Chaos, Unit Alpha, to assemble. A few cadets froze mid-step. Others turned pale, and some whispered to one another in their native tongues, their voices full of dread. The Corridor of Chaos wasn't just a drill. It was the drill. The ultimate live-fire simulation designed to crush arrogance, test fear thresholds, and reveal the true measure of survival instinct. In the history of the Academy, no test had garnered as many injury reports, psychological trauma claims, or emergency medevac orders. The corridor was a labyrinth of shifting walls, randomized enemy drones, plasma traps, pressure mines, and deceptive illusions. It replicated real war zones from 1,000 worlds, and simulated enemies from 1,000 more. Some cadets who had walked in confident had crawled out sobbing, clutching broken limbs or shattered pride. The word chaos wasn't hyperbole, it was a warning. The large double doors to the observation chamber opened with a hiss, and the students began filing in. Every species was represented: tall insectoids from Thrachna, crystalline entities from the Kulex clusters, slithering Srathi with bioluminescent skins, and the avian winged Dwarolins who hovered just above the polished floor. Amid this diverse assembly moved one distinct figure. A young woman with cropped dark hair, a scar beneath her chin, and a relaxed gait that suggested either total ignorance or reckless confidence. Her name was Raina Hayes. She was the only human in her class. And she was from Earth, the infamous Deathworld. Most of the alien cadets kept their distance from Raina, not out of hate, but out of a kind of bewildered caution. Earthborn cadets were rare. Their planet's conditions, the unstable weather, apex predators, plagues, and frequent global disasters, bred a kind of unpredictability that unnerved other species. Raina didn't boast or seek attention, but even in her silence, she carried the weight of her origin. Deathworlders didn't flinch at horror, they adopted it. As the briefing began, a hologram flickered to life above the center podium. Commander Zur, a four-armed officer from the Silkari Dominion, stood tall in his polished black armor, his voice sharp as fractured glass. Unit Alpha, today you face the final stage of your mid-year evaluation. The Corridor of Chaos is not a game. It is a synthesis of all tactical, sensory, and combat knowledge you have gathered. The drill operates in real time with live fire. No lethal rounds will be aimed at vital organs, but mistakes will hurt. You will go in alone. You will exit only when the simulation ends or you call emergency extraction. Understand this. Quitting will reflect on your permanent record. Murmurs rippled through the ranks. Some cadets clenched their claws or mandibles. A few adjusted neural implants, uploading emergency subroutines into their combat visors. Others began low-frequency calming hums native to their culture, a way to regulate nervous systems under pressure. Raina, meanwhile, leaned against the wall with arms crossed, chewing on a piece of dehydrated fruit strip from her lunch tray. She didn't even glance at the hologram. One cadet, a blue-scaled male from the Akaran Empire, leaned toward his friend and whispered, "I heard Avraxian last cycle broke down during the third wave and curled into a ball, screamed for extraction before the halfway mark." His companion, a tentacled Elothrian, blinked slowly and replied, "That was the commander's son. He was sent to medical for reconditioning." Memory scrubbed. Both turned their gaze to Raina, watching her chew idly. "She's next," the Elothrian added. "She won't last a minute." In truth, Raina had heard the stories, the legends of cadets snapping under the corridor's pressure. She'd read the files, seen the footage, but she wasn't concerned. Not because she thought she was better, but because she had survived things that weren't simulations. At 16, she had helped pull her younger brother out of a collapsed metro tunnel during an earthquake in San Angeles. At 17, she was mauled by a wild dog while crossing a quarantine zone to bring food to her neighbors. At 18, she volunteered to help control a wildfire outbreak in the Argentinian Andes. For her, near death wasn't something invented in a lab, it was home. The instructor called the first cadet. A crystalline female named Vurla stepped forward. Her shards glistened nervously under the overhead lights as she entered the corridor. The door shut behind her with a hiss. The room watched in silence. A screen displayed her progress. She made it through the first trap, then the second, then was hit with a concussive sonic pulse and stumbled. After a shaky recovery, she was cornered by 3 aerial drones and called for extraction. Total time, 4 minutes, 12 seconds. The next few cadets followed, each with their own species-specific advantages. Thermal sight, rapid reflexes, cloaking mechanisms. But all exited the simulation either injured or emotionally fractured. One cadet limped out with burned armor. Another emerged drenched in sweat, trembling uncontrollably. The murmurs grew louder. Then Reyna's name appeared on the board. Cadet Reyna Hayes. Prepare for simulation, Commander Zur announced. The room quieted. Eyes turned. Whispers halted. She uncrossed her arms and walked forward with a casual bounce in her step. No armor enhancements, no neural uplinks, just her Academy standard bodysuit and fingerless gloves. Would you like a reflex booster or cortical dampener? The technician asked her as she stepped onto the prep platform. She shook her head. I'm good. Are you sure? Most cadets, she grinned. Most cadets aren't from Earth. The technician fell silent. The doors to the corridor hissed open. Dark, empty, waiting. The sound of internal mechanisms shifting echoed through the hall. The scent of ozone, machine oil, and plasma residue wafted out. Reyna stepped in without hesitation. The doors sealed behind her. The room held its collective breath. On the observation screen, her vitals blinked calmly. Steady heart rate, slow breathing, baseline pupil dilation, unusual. Most cadets spiked before the first trap. A Srati professor adjusted his lenses. Strange. She shows no signs of anticipatory stress. Commander Zur's eyes narrowed. Then perhaps she has no idea what's coming. But Reyna did. She just wasn't afraid. Inside the corridor, Reyna stretched her shoulders and looked around the dimly lit space. Panels shifted, a low alarm sounded, red strobes blinked. And then came the voice. Cold, mechanical, taunting. Simulation initiated. Welcome, cadet. Prepare to survive. A hume of energy built around her, and somewhere in the chaos of flashing lights and arming drones, Reyna Hayes smiled. Because it wasn't fear she felt, it was amusement. She had seen worse. She had lived through worse. And deep down, part of her was excited. The corridor awakened like a beast with a mind of its own. The moment Reyna crossed the threshold and the heavy doors sealed behind her, the lights above flickered into harsh crimson pulses. The floor hummed beneath her boots as the grid beneath her vibrated slightly, adjusting in real time. It was a living, shifting labyrinth. Somewhere deep within its core, the system analyzed her vitals and recalibrated the simulation's intensity. She had no idea how many weapons it had just unlocked in response to her calm vitals and unprotected frame. But she suspected it was more than usual. A mechanical voice echoed from every direction. Subject, human. Classification, Deathworld origin. Risk assessment, unconfirmed. Adjusting parameters. She raised an eyebrow at the ceiling and smirked. Cute? Her voice didn't carry far. The sound dampeners embedded in the corridor's architecture were doing their job. Every step forward was absorbed into silence, giving the unsettling impression that she was walking through a void rather than a simulation. Then, without warning, the corridor reacted. A panel to her right blew open with a concussive blast, spraying shards of metal and white-hot sparks into the air. A plasma round fired from the opposite wall, targeting the distraction. Reyna ducked instinctively, rolled forward into a sprint, and let out a short burst of laughter that echoed just faintly behind her. Not a manic laugh, not panicked, just amused. So that's your opener? She muttered, eyes scanning the space ahead. All right. The corridor didn't pause. The lights went dark for a split second, then flared again. This time in an erratic strobe pattern meant to disorient. Reyna blinked once, then twice, adjusted her breathing and narrowed her eyes. She moved low and quick, her steps trained and precise. From the ceiling, a rapid deployment turret dropped into place with a whir, tracking her movement and firing bursts of non-lethal but high-voltage stun bolts. She spun around one bolt, ducked beneath another, then used the momentum to dive against the wall. Her elbow smashed into an emergency panel. A snap hiss sounded, and a shield door attempted to deploy in front of her. But she was already gone, sprinting along the newly revealed passage that cut at an angle through the maze. Outside the corridor, in the observation room, silence fell again, deeper than before. The screen tracking Reyna's vitals showed almost no change. A minor uptick in pulse from the turret's initial fire, but otherwise steady. One of the Coalexian observers, composed entirely of translucent blue crystal, tilted his head and murmured through the vocal emulator at his chest, "Why is she smiling?" On screen, Reyna had just evaded a cluster of ceiling-mount dart drones with such fluid grace that one Swati student quietly muttered something in his own language that loosely translated to, "She dances through death." Back inside the simulation, Reyna rounded a corner and came face to face with a visual trick. A full wall of flickering holograms displayed the illusion of a collapsing tunnel, fire, debris, bodies. The system wanted her to freeze, to second-guess, but Reyna knew it wasn't real. No heat registered on her skin, no tremor in the floor beneath her. She walked straight through the collapsing illusion without even flinching. Behind her, another drone activated and gave chase. The simulation had expected her to turn, to panic, to retreat back toward the waiting ambush drones. Instead, she vaulted a barrier and deliberately entered a subsection known for unpredictable terrain. Most cadets avoided that region. It was built to trigger motion-reactive traps, with changing gravitational pulls and sudden floor collapses. Reyna welcomed the challenge. As she moved through the unstable zone, the ground beneath her tilted violently to the left. Her boots lost traction for a moment, but she didn't fall. She twisted mid-air, kicked off the wall beside her, and landed on a suspended platform that immediately began to lower into a pit. A countdown flashed in mid-air, 15, 14, 13. At the bottom, simulated acid hissed and steamed. She screened the screen a dry look. "You seriously thought I'd stand still?" With one running step, she launched off the edge, grabbed a pipe overhead, and swung herself back up onto a ledge. The countdown vanished. The acid chamber hissed with unspent drama. Reyna exhaled slowly and continued forward. Her footfall stayed light. Her breathing was calm. She was utterly unshaken. The system, now visibly confused by her lack of trauma response, changed tactics. Gas vented into the corridor. A thick, translucent mist laced with hallucinogenic properties designed to simulate combat confusion. Most cadets panicked or reacted with wild swings in this phase. Reyna blinked slowly, pulled her collar over her nose, and kept walking. The room shimmered. The walls twisted visually. Figures began to appear, faceless threats, shadows of past enemies, distorted voices whispering words of fear and loss. One of the projections took the form of her brother's face, twisted in agony. She stopped, not from fear, but from anger. "Low blow," she said flatly. She stepped forward and swung her fist straight through the illusion, breaking the projector hidden behind it with one clean strike. The mist cleared within seconds. Her steps didn't slow. Outside the corridor, one of the professors leaned closer to the screen. She broke the hallucination manually. That projector was meant to be untargetable from her angle. She didn't use the targeting interface, another corrected. She saw it. Commander Zur crossed his arms slowly, eyes narrowing. Or guessed it. Either way, she's now in Zone 5. No cadet has ever reached Zone 5 without injury. Inside the corridor, Reyna crouched behind a cover wall as a line of high-speed drones flew overhead, searching. Her hand slid along the floor, searching for loose material. She found a strip of wiring, tore it free, and wrapped it around her wrist. Then, using one of the broken illusion fragments, she rigged a quick trigger feedback loop. She tossed the device into the hallway. The drones picked it up instantly and fired. The loop triggered. The drone's targeting systems overloaded for 3 seconds, long enough for her to slide underneath and into the next area. As the corridor tried to stabilize, the system's voice echoed again. "Unorthodox strategy detected. Simulation integrity compromised. Recalibrating." Reyna snorted. "Can't handle a little creativity?" The final section of the corridor opened with a dramatic hiss, steam rising from vents around the frame. A full-body armor drone stepped forward, armed with blunt force plasma batons and kinetic shields. It towered over her, easily twice her height. It was the final boss of the simulation. No cadet had ever defeated it without damage. Reyna didn't hesitate. She ran straight at it. The drone swung. She slid low between its legs and turned as it pivoted. She waited for its tell to the slight shoulder twitch before a swing. She caught the timing. On its second swing, she ducked, planted both hands on the floor, and kicked upward into the drone's chest with both feet. It staggered just enough for her to grab a loose panel on its side. She jammed her wiring device into the exposed socket and whispered, "Let's see how you like your own feedback." The drone jerked violently, spasming in place before collapsing with a thud. The simulation lights turned white. A soft chime sounded. "Simulation complete," the voice announced. "Cadet Raina Hayes, time 9 minutes 47 seconds. Status uninjured." Outside, the observation room didn't cheer. It didn't gasp. It simply stopped, like something sacred had just happened. Raina stepped out of the corridor, brushing dust from her sleeve, a grin still tugging at her lips. She wasn't even breathing hard, and she was laughing. The moment Raina crossed the threshold back into the main observation hall, an oppressive silence met her. No applause, no instructor's praise, not even the usual debriefing buzz that followed any major drill. She pulled a towel from the rack near the exit station and casually dabbed the sweat from her forehead, though there was barely any. Her lips curled into a half-smile, the same smile she had worn through most of the simulation, and she rolled her shoulders with a slow, practiced motion, as if the entire experience had been little more than a warm-up routine. Every pair of eyes in the room was on her. Some were wide, stunned into paralysis, others narrowed with suspicion or something bordering on fear. A few cadets whispered among themselves in hushed tones, their languages forming a tapestry of disbelief, curiosity, and anxiety. Raina didn't flinch under the weight of their attention. Instead, she walked past the front row, where the highest-ranking instructors and visiting tacticians were seated, and gave a brief nod to no one in particular, before leaning against the far wall like nothing had happened. A full 2 minutes passed before Commander Zur spoke. He didn't rise, he didn't gesture. He simply asked, "Is there something amusing about the corridor of chaos, Cadet Hayes?" She raised an eyebrow, tilted her head slightly, and replied, "Not the corridor itself, just the way it tries so hard to be terrifying." Her voice carried across the room, unshaken and clear. The Kulexian observer slowly turned his crystal-formed head toward Commander Zur and transmitted a low-frequency tone into his translator. She perceived the psychological manipulation and dismissed it. Zur's 4 arms slowly curled, the upper set folding across his chest while the lower ones tapped a control panel on his seat. The simulation data replayed across the holoscreen, focusing on Raina's vital signs. Her heart rate remained steady even during near-lethal situations. Her oxygen intake had spiked only once during a moment of exertion, not fear. The final drone engagement showed her movements frame by frame, efficient, reactive, deliberate. But what drew attention most wasn't her technique, it was her face. She smiled, the Srati instructor hissed from the second tier of the audience. "Through the illusions, through the traps, even through combat." He leaned forward, his body coils tightening. "What kind of species smiles at violence?" Professor Lurev of the Akaran delegation, a reptilian being with iridescent skin that shimmered between shades of cobalt and bronze, exhaled through his gill slits. "I don't believe she smiled because of violence. She smiled because she wasn't surprised. That level of danger, for her, is normal." From the back of the chamber, one of the cadets spoke up, his voice trembling slightly. She didn't even use gear." Another followed, "She laughed during the final fight, like it was a joke." A third whispered, "She's not like us." The room was shifting. The initial shock was evolving into a kind of quiet reverence tinged with unease. The legend of Deathworlders had long been passed among the academies in exaggerated stories. Humans who trained in disasters, who tamed wildfires and danced through hurricanes, who hunted predators with sticks and built shelters in radioactive zones. Those tales were easy to dismiss from a distance, but now, standing less than 20 meters away, one of those myths had stepped out of a combat simulation unscathed and smiling. The myth had a name, a face, and a terrifying calm. Raina, still leaning against the wall, began peeling off the sweat-dampened gloves. Her hands bore small scars, the kind one didn't get from training simulations or structured drills. She glanced toward the instructor seats and asked, Are we supposed to do a written report now, or is this one of those silent trauma reflection things? Her tone wasn't mocking. It was dry, honest. She wasn't playing a part. She didn't know how to be afraid in situations others found paralyzing. Jure stood. His movements were slow and precise, betraying an internal calculation rather than anger. Report to Briefing Chamber 3. You'll be debriefed alone. The command was unorthodox. Normally, group debriefs followed, but no one questioned him. Reyna simply gave a light shrug, tossed her towel onto the nearest bench, and headed for the corridor without waiting for escort. The door hissed shut behind her. Inside the observation chamber, the faculty remained behind. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Professor Lurev activated a private frequency reserved for high-level assessments. She is not standard cadet material, he said. She exceeded every metric, replied Commander Jure. She disrupted every metric, the Srothy countered. Lurev nodded slowly. Which makes her more dangerous. Or more valuable, the Kulatian hummed. We must understand what shaped her. What caused that reaction to fear? Jure tapped another command. A new set of files opened, this time not simulation logs, but Reyna's Earth history. Natural disaster zones. Volunteering and emergency relief. Her acceptance into the academy was marked with a high-risk psychological flag. Not for instability, but for emotional detachment under duress. She treats stress like a puzzle, Jure observed. The others stared at the data. One by one, the pieces fell into place. Reyna didn't suppress fear. She never even registered it. Back in Briefing Room 3, Reyna sat alone. The lights were dimmed, and a single holoscreen floated before her, displaying a condensed replay of her simulation. She watched herself flip over traps, disable drones, dodge projectiles, all with that same calm expression. A voice came through the speaker above. "How did you do it?" She rolled her eyes. "Do what?" "Remain calm." Reyna leaned back in her chair, stretching her arms overhead. "You make it sound like I was supposed to lose it in there." "You were. Statistically, 94% of cadets suffer panic or trauma before Zone 4. You exhibited no hesitation." She thought for a moment. "Maybe because where I'm from, hesitating means dying. You either keep moving or you stop for good." The speaker was silent for several seconds. Then it asked, "And the laughter?" That made her smile again, this time with a shade more emotion. "Because it was trying so hard. That corridor threw everything it had at me. The collapsing tunnels, the illusions, that big angry drone. All of it meant to make me feel small. I've seen worse, in places that didn't even want to kill me. So yeah." I laughed. It felt like it needed to scare me, like it needed me to break, so it could feel powerful. Another pause. "What scares you, Cadet Hayes?" Her expression sobered slightly. She didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, she said, "Not having anyone left to fight for." The line cut. Moments later, the doors reopened. Reyna stepped out into the corridor, her posture unchanged, her mind already distancing itself from the questions. But something had shifted behind those doors. Not in her, but in the way the academy would see her from now on. She wasn't just another cadet. She was the one who laughed at fear, and the galaxy had just witnessed it in silence. The next morning, the academy halls felt different. Subtle, but present. Conversations shifted as Reyna passed. Instructors nodded slightly longer than before. Cadets fell quiet when she entered a room, as if the atmosphere thickened around her presence. No one confronted her, no one challenged her. But something unspoken was building. A boundary carved not from hostility but from awe, and something sharper beneath it. Uncertainty. Reyna noticed, she always noticed, the instincts drilled into her back on Earth, in alleyways where danger wasn't theoretical, in shelters where silence was survival, made her sensitive to shifts in behavior. She wasn't offended. She wasn't surprised. But she was watchful. After midday drills, Reyna entered the auxiliary gym. It was usually empty at this hour. A narrow, rectangular space with hard matting and minimal lighting, mostly used by cadets preparing for stealth and solo maneuvers. She preferred it this way. It gave her the silence she needed to think without interruption. She started with simple movements, stretches, shoulder rotations, breath pacing. Then she transitioned into a rhythmic pattern of punches against a suspended resistance sphere. The sphere adjusted its hardness and tilt dynamically, but Reyna's hands moved like she wasn't fighting a machine, but something personal. With each hit, her expression remained focused, not angry. It was meditation through violence, memory through motion. Somewhere between a downward elbow strike and a low spin kick, the door slid open with a gentle hiss. Reyna didn't pause. She continued, the sound of her breath sinking with each impact. After 3 more precise blows, she let the sphere retract to the ceiling and turned slowly. Standing in the doorway was Karen Vell, an Orlin cadet with winged arms folded across his chest. His kind rarely entered confined spaces. Their wings, even when folded, made them uncomfortable in low ceilings. The fact that he had come here at all meant he had something important to say. "You don't talk much," he said, stepping into the room carefully, his talons clicking on the floor with each step. Reyna wiped her palms on a towel and shrugged. "Not much to say. You scared everyone," he said plainly. She raised an eyebrow. "Because I finished the corridor? Because you smiled while doing it." Reyna tossed the towel aside and leaned against the wall. "If that's all it takes to scare someone, they're in the wrong place." Karen's feathers ruffled slightly. He didn't flinch under her words, but he studied her with something approaching fascination. "My species has trained to regulate fear for centuries. We have ancient rites, meditation practices, older than your planet's recorded language. But none of us enjoy pressure. None of us laugh in danger." Reyna crossed her arms. "I don't laugh because I enjoy it. I laugh because it's familiar. When you grow up watching buildings fall, when you get used to alerts buzzing through your comms every other week, not in drills, in real life, it does something to you." Karen stepped closer. "Then that's the difference. The rest of us simulate. You lived it." She didn't answer. He was right, but she didn't want to say it aloud. It wasn't a badge of honor, it was just history, hers and her planet's. She looked past him, to the digital panel above the gym door. A glowing number showed the hours left until the next field deployment, an interspecies cooperative mission in an uninhabited zone of the Traxus moons. It was meant to test team cohesion. Reyna was assigned to Squad H. "You're in my unit," Karen added, following her gaze. "Tomorrow. Traxus Moon 2. Mixed terrain survival. No command structure. Just adaptation." She nodded. "Good." Karen hesitated. Then he said, softer than before, "Some of the others. They're not sure how to work with you." She met his eyes now, her voice low but steady. "Because I don't break the way they expect me to?" He didn't respond. He didn't need to. That night, Reyna returned to her dorm. The room was small, standard for the academy. Bed, desk, data console, reinforced walls that dulled the constant hum of spaceflight systems. But she had personalized it in small ways. A strip of cloth from a rescue drone she once repaired. A photo printed on plastifilm, her and her younger brother, both soaked in rain, both smiling like idiots after surviving a flood in Sector 9. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling. The light dimmed at her mental command, but her mind didn't dim with it. Instead, it drifted. She remembered fire. Real fire, not the kind made in a simulation lab. Flames that climbed walls faster than water hoses could fight them. The taste of smoke in her lungs. The way her hands blistered when she wrapped a child in her jacket and ran through a collapsing hallway. That had been Earth. Not a battlefield, not a war. Just a Tuesday in a dying district. She remembered her mother's voice over the emergency comm. Distant, frantic, then cut off by static. She remembered dragging metal away from a collapsed shelter with 6 strangers who couldn't even speak the same language, but who worked together anyway, because survival didn't require words. She remembered laughing then too, not because it was funny, because it kept her breathing. She turned her head toward the photo. Her brother was smiling, teeth too big for his face, hair a mess. She'd given up her place in the evac shuttle to make sure he got on it. He never forgave her for it. But he lived. That was enough. A knock sounded. Reyna sat up. No one knocked at this hour. She approached the door, opened it, and found Instructor Vell standing in the hall. Vell was an older man, Terran lineage with some Martian gene enhancement in his shoulders. Tall, angular, and always dressed in pristine black. "May I?" he asked. She nodded and stepped aside. He entered without comment, glanced once at the photo on her wall, then turned to her. "The Council has reviewed your simulation in full. The advisory board has voted to fast-track you into advanced survival scenarios. She folded her arms. You mean I'm getting promoted? You're being separated, he corrected, not from your peers, from their path. You'll walk a different one. Raina studied his face. Because I passed? Because you didn't flinch. She tilted her head. That's a reason to isolate me? It's a reason to train you differently. He approached her console and keyed in a new assignment packet. It glowed on the display. Tomorrow, during the Traxxas operation, you'll receive new orders mid-mission. Follow them. She didn't ask what they would be. She didn't ask who they came from. She only said, understood. Vel turned to leave, then paused at the door. You aren't like the others, Cadet Hayes, and you know it. The question is, do you want to be? She said nothing. The door closed behind him. Raina looked back at the display. The packet was marked with a security seal she hadn't seen before. 3 interlocked rings around a black triangle. She sat down, tapped the seal, and watched the encryption unfold. She didn't smile this time, but deep inside she felt that familiar echo again. Not fear, not pride, just readiness. The descent onto Traxxas Moon 2 was silent, heavy with the unspoken anticipation of challenge. From the observation windows of the transport shuttle, the landscape below looked like fractured bone. Pale ridges jutted from the earth like claws frozen mid-strike. The air was thin, barely breathable without filtration masks, and the magnetic pull of the moon shifted at random intervals, forcing everyone to recalibrate their balance with each step. Squad H touched down at grid marker 7K, their boots crunching into brittle terrain coated with fine, dry dust. Above them, violet clouds coiled low across the sky like ink and water, warning of an incoming electric storm. The mission parameters were simple. Navigate 6 kilometers to the extraction point, while identifying unstable terrain, establishing a mobile relay, and maintaining team integrity. No command structure, no instructors, pure field integration across species. Raina kept her visor up for the first 20 minutes. The others had deployed visual enhancement arrays and used voice-linked tactical relays. She relied on her senses. She had grown up reading the wind and the sky. The storm wasn't close yet. The moon had a rhythm, and she moved in sync with it. Beside her walked Karen, his wings wrapped tightly along his sides. He didn't speak, but he watched her steps. More than once he adjusted his own based on hers. Behind them, the crystalline Kulexian cadet named Prith glided across the terrain in long, sweeping strides, murmuring updates in encoded tones. The rest of the squad fanned out, a swarthy female with brilliant green scales named Thealia, and a silent, towering Urax named Melder who hadn't spoken once since landing. Raina didn't mind the quiet. It gave her space to think. 2 kilometers in, the first tremor hit. It was subtle, just a shiver beneath the soil, but it was enough to cause Prith to stumble. The Srati spun into alert mode, lowering her body to the ground with instinctual grace. Melder activated a drone, which floated upward and scanned the terrain. Seismic movement under Sector 7.9, Prith translated, blinking crystalline eyelids. Unstable sediment pockets forming. Raina pointed westward without hesitation. We go that way, up along the ridgeline. It's steeper, but it's solid. Leah frowned. That's not in the safe parameters. Neither is falling through the ground, Raina said, already moving. They followed. Not because of rank, because her certainty pulled them forward like gravity. The higher ridgeline was jagged, exposed, and laced with metallic dust that clung to their suits, but it held. As they climbed, the storm finally broke overhead, crackling arcs of plasma across the violet sky. The comms buzzed with static. Signal interference, Karen said. If we lose line of sight, we lose contact. Raina pulled out a tether pack and clipped it to her belt, tossing the end to him. Stay connected then. The squad moved as one, tethered in twos, eyes flicking between the ground and the sky. When the wind screamed across the pass, Melder took the front, absorbing the worst of the gusts. Prith worked to stabilize the relay beacon on his back while Thea placed signal markers every 40 meters. It was coordinated, it was efficient, and then Raina's wrist console blinked. A message, now new coordinates, 4.2K southwest. Deviate from squad order. Order, Solo. She stared at the screen for a moment longer than necessary. Carrie noticed. Is something wrong? She clicked the console off and shook her head. Keep moving. I'll check the edge of that next ridge. Karen opened his mouth to protest, but she was already walking, unclipping the tether and veering southwest. None of them followed. Something in her tone made that impossible. She crossed the boundary line of the training zone and descended into terrain not marked on any of the cadet maps. It was raw land, jagged spires and shattered stone fields, pockmarked with old impact craters. The storm here was thicker, darker. As she moved, her visor began picking up erratic readings, metallic interference, irregular seismic patterns, pulsing electromagnetic currents. At the base of a crater, a figure waited. Not human, not cadet, not from the academy. It was armored in dark metal and stood still as stone, holding a long staff that emitted a low-frequency hum. A test unit. Not a simulation drone. A true combat construct. Reyna stopped a dozen meters away. The console buzzed again. Objective, observe, survive. She sighed. So this is the real exam. The construct moved. It surged forward without hesitation, striking downward with the staff like a guillotine. Reyna dodged left, sliding into the ash-soaked dirt. The staff struck the ground and sent out a shockwave. Her visor cracked along the edge, throwing sparks. She tore it off and hurled it aside, rising, bare-faced into the storm. The construct advanced again, faster this time. Reyna used the momentum of the slope to dive beneath its swing, latching onto its leg and climbing its frame. It tried to shake her, but she reached the central neural pack and jammed her plasma cutter into the seam. Sparks flew. The construct bucked violently, dislodging her before it collapsed sideways, disabled but not destroyed. She rolled hard and rose to her knees, blood at the edge of her mouth. Her ribs ached, her hand trembled, but she was alive. The console blinked. Confirmed. Adaptive response passed. She lay back on the ground, eyes on the dark sky, rain sizzling into steam on her skin. Minutes passed. A shadow blocked the light. Kirin stood above her, his wings shielding her face from the storm. "You weren't scouting," he said quietly. She didn't answer. "You were being watched." He offered her his hand. She took it. When they returned to the squad, the rest said nothing. Melder simply handed her a hydration pack. Prith clicked out a few soft tones in acknowledgement. Flea raised an eyebrow, but didn't question her bruised state. Kirin stood beside her, silent and steady. They reached the extraction point together. Back at the academy, the instructors debriefed her privately. No medals, no formal recognition, just new access credentials, a new path, a new tier of training. Late that night, Rainey returned to her room and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her face was scratched, her eyes were tired, but behind all of it, behind the muscle and bone, something remained untouched. The will, the calm, the reason the others stared. She hadn't just passed the corridor, she hadn't just survived Traxxas. She had changed the definition of what it meant to be prepared, not because she had better gear, or faster reflexes, or more strength, but because she had already lived through worse. And when others trembled before the storm, she stood in it and laughed. From that day forward, whispers traveled the halls of the academy about the human girl who never flinched, who stared down machines and illusions, who outran fear without ever needing to scream. Cadets who once questioned her began to seek her out. Instructors who once watched her from a distance began to recommend her for missions with higher risk. The academy adjusted its training protocols. New modules were rewritten, the scales of mental endurance were recalibrated, because Reyna Hayes had shown them something they never understood before. Sometimes, the strongest weapon in the galaxy wasn't strength, or speed, or firepower. Sometimes it was the quiet certainty that no matter what came next, she wouldn't break.